Good evening. I'm Wesley Chenault, Associate Director for Strategic Initiatives and Programs. On behalf of Smithsonian Libraries and Archives, I'm pleased to welcome you to our program, Music, HerStory, Women, Punk, and Zines. Before we get started, we want to share a bit of housekeeping information. This session will be recorded and available later. You'll notice that this Zoom is in webinar format, so you don't have to worry about your camera or mic, but do feel free to use the chat feature. We will also add links to the chat as we go to related resources and upcoming events. Please note those will be shared in a follow-up email. Closed captioning is available via transcript, and you're welcome to turn that feature on. We'll be saving audience questions until the end, and we'll be using the Zoom Q&A feature. And now to begin our program. We would like to gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral lands we live and work, and also recognize the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. The exhibition, Music, HerStory, Women, and Music of Social Change, tells complex, under-recognized stories about the women of history's contributions to music of social change. From suffrage and the civil rights movements to nursery rhymes, faith institutions, and punk rock, women's musical leadership is central to the American story. Accessible to both English and Spanish speakers, Music, HerStory tells these stories through album covers, books, photographs, sheet music, and more, and features a vibrant and varied playlist of accompanying songs. The exhibition was co-created by Smithsonian Libraries and Archives and the Center for Folk, Life, and Cultural Heritage, and can be viewed in the Libraries and Archives Gallery on the first floor of the National Museum of American History until July 2024. The physical exhibition is complemented by a rich bilingual digital exhibition online that expands its reach to geographically diverse audiences. This project received support from the Smithsonian American Women's History Initiative. Tonight's program is the first of 3 zine-related events we are hosting this week in honor of the exhibition and Women's History Month. This Saturday, we're offering 2 free zine-making workshops in the National Museum of American History. We'll include details about that in the chat. And now I'd like to introduce tonight's moderator, Meredith Holgren. Meredith is a research associate with the Center for Folk Life and Cultural Heritage. She is the curator at the exhibition, Music, HerStory, Women, and Music of Social Change. Meredith has been affiliated with the Smithsonian for more than a decade, first serving as program manager at Smithsonian Folkways Recordings, the institution's nonprofit record label, and later as curator of American women's music. A longtime researcher of music and social change, she also co-curated the Smithsonian Folkways box set, The Social Power of Music, which was published in 2019. She's held several professional service positions within the Smithsonian, including on the curatorial committee of the American Women's History Initiative, the executive committee of Smithsonian Music, and as chair of the Institutional Review Board. Now over to you, Meredith.
Hi, everyone. Welcome again to our program, Women, Zines, and Punk, where we're going to explore the intersections of music, feminism, and zine publications. As Wesley mentioned, this program complements our exhibition, Music, HerStory, Women in Music of Social Change, which is open now through July 2024 in the National Museum of American History. Next slide. In this exhibition, we tell music history through a variety of objects from across the Smithsonian, including sheet music, instruments, books, and material culture. We also included punk zines as an important part of women's music history. So for those who may not be familiar, punk zines are self-published periodicals, often distributed freely through an informal network of music fans. Of particular interest today are feminist music zines, which broke taboos with publications about gender harassment, racial politics, women's health, music, and sexual violence, among other topics. We're delighted to welcome a number of esteemed guests to talk about these topics today. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists. Next slide. Allison Wolfe was born an identical twin in Memphis, Tennessee. She was raised in an all-female household by a lesbian feminist mother who started the first women's health clinic in Olympia, Washington. Wolfe co-founded a punk feminist fanzine called Germs, an all-girl band called Bratmobile, and third wave feminist punk movement Riot Grrrl. In addition to performing in numerous bands over the years, she also initiated the nonprofit feminist music festival Ladyfest, which spread around the US, the UK, and beyond. She currently lives in Los Angeles, where she produces a podcast called I'm in the Band, sings in bands, teaches, DJs, and is working on an oral history of Riot Grrrl through a book and podcast. Molly Neuman is Chief Marketing Officer of Downtown Music Holdings, the world's leading music service provider. She previously served as president of Songtrust, which grew under her leadership to manage more than 3 million copyrights in 145 countries. With a career that's been focused on empowering musicians at all career stages, Neuman has been head of music at Kickstarter, as well as interim president and vice president of the American Association of Independent Music, also known as A2IM. Her musical career began as a drummer in Bratmobile, a punk band who were among the first of the feminist Riot Grrrl movement. In the 1990s, together with Allison and Wolfe, she co-created the Germs zine, which is currently on display in the Music HerStory exhibition. And this is a photograph from the case in which Germs is presented. Next slide. Michelle Casto is a librarian in the People's Archive at the DC Public Library's Local History Department. She's one of the founders of the DC Punk Archive, a project to document the DC area punk scene, past and present, by archiving collections donated by the local music community. Some of these items, including punk zines, were included and licensed for the Music HerStory exhibition, a couple of which you can see here, Jigsaw and Bikini Kill. Next slide. Osa Atoy is an artist, teacher, and ceramicist operating Pottery by Osa, producing small batch handmade ceramics. In 2006, Osa published the first issue of Shotgun Seamstress, which was inspired by her personal experience of being a Black woman in a white-dominated punk scene. Currently residing in Sarasota, Florida, Osa previously lived in Portland, Oregon, and New Orleans, Louisiana. Osa is also a punk musician who performed in numerous bands, including VHS, New Bloods, and Firebrand. You can go to the Zoom video now. So thank you all again for joining us. You may turn on your cameras. Fantastic. We're delighted again to welcome you and look forward to our discussion today. To kick things off, let's just dive right into zines. Why don't you all tell us a little bit about the zines you created and how they evolved over time? And if you could try to give us a sense of the cultural context in which your zines developed, I think that'd be really helpful for our audiences. So for Allison, Molly, and Osa, I'd like to hear what was going on in your lives that inspired you to create zines. And for Michelle, I'd like to hear about what inspired you to collect and steward punk zines, and maybe give us some context about why it's significant to have a collection like this in the DC Public Library. We'll start first with Allison, and then we'll hear from Molly and Osa, and lastly, Michelle.
Okay, hi.
Hi.
Well, I think, and I mean, Molly, jump in anywhere if I don't get it right, but I think that, well, Molly and I met in 1989 in Eugene, Oregon at University of Oregon. And we both kind of had, I guess, politicized views of things, though in a different way. And we definitely felt the lack of representation of girls in music and punk, and just, I don't know, kind of maybe a dismissal of girls and women in the things that we were interested in, or the scenes that we were interested in. And even though I'm pretty sure we came up with the idea of a band and the name of a band, Bratmobile, right away, I think it took us a while to kind of get instruments or play or get it together, really write songs. So one thing that came easier and quicker was to do doing a fanzine. And we were very much encouraged by the women in Bikini Kill, who were already doing zines, well, like Toby Vale, who did Jigsaw. Also before that, Donna Dresch, who did Chainsaw. And I think we just sort of saw it as this very immediate means of self-expression. and just connecting with like-minded others and kind of, pen paling and all that kind of stuff. I guess it's, creating community, really.
Great.
Yeah, I think there was also, we were excited being college freshmen to join a fledgling concept of a radio station that was being designed at the University of Oregon. It's kind of funny, there was no college radio that existed. And if I recall correctly, we had an idea for a radio show that would, we would be able to play all the music of the groups and bands that we didn't see being recognized or having an audience in other places. And when I think we joke about it, when we realized the hippies couldn't get it together to launch the radio station, we decided to put a fanzine together. No offense to hippies. And I think that was sort of like, to your point, Allison, it was immediate, it was accessible, and it was something that we had a lot of reference for because there was a pretty strong zine community in the music space that we were, living in. So that was, it was might as well that we could do something. So we could actually make a thing, and it was not terribly expensive, and there was lower barrier to entry.
Great. Osa.
I mean, my first zine came out in 2006, so and I was living in Portland at the time. I moved to Portland in, I want to say 2001, and I think that was the year of their first Zine Fest, the first Portland Zine Symposium. So yeah, and then just having already known about Riot Grrrl and all the zines that came out of that, I don't know, I was just always reading zines. There were zines everywhere. I feel like my zine was actually kind of premeditated. It wasn't kind of this I don't know, impulsive thing. It was like something that I had wanted to do for a while, but maybe didn't know who my audience would be because I was surrounded by white people. So there was a time between, when I was living in Portland where I actually moved to California for a year and moved to the Bay Area and met a bunch of Black and brown punks. And that was the first time I had that kind of community, really. And that kind of helped me figure out who I was going to write to or who I wanted my zines to be for. So that's what I mean about how it wasn't kind of impulsive. It was just this thing that had been brewing and stewing for a long time, I think. But yeah, I was just kind of immersed in a punk or the DIY culture, and zines were a big part of that.
Great. A follow-up to this, does anyone want to, recall a particularly memorable issue or topic, something that you really continue to think about today that you published in one of your zines? There were a lot of great interviews with artists. I don't know. Yeah. Anything stands out?
Well, I think part of what we were trying to, there was a certain documentarian approach that I think we wanted to have with what we were doing, because that was sort of the problem that we saw. The magazines, the record stores, the places that we went to engage with music just didn't have that much representation of women, or didn't have enough. And so what was the focus was trying to do everything, at least that's how I remember it, that we could to sort of celebrate and recognize women that were making music or that were helping make music, and whether that would be recognizing the people behind the scenes, or, if we knew someone was an engineer or a tour manager or something. There was, even though I don't remember maybe possibly writing about them specifically, but that was part of the energy that we were trying to see happen. And so yeah, I think and then there was certainly, I think because of the time of life that we were in, and sort of a lot of the learning I was doing specifically around and Allison was doing on her own too, about feminist theory and other sort of things that are more academic approach to you know, our self-awareness, I guess, and having a safe space for, or as safe as we thought it could be, for sharing what those sort of sentiments were like. So yeah, that was, I think, part of, we didn't have like an editorial strategy. And now Allison's a journalist, or she's like, has an academic degree in journalism, and I think it's like a different there's much different approach that you might have if you are trying to have something that's much, that's a discipline behind it. That wasn't really the case.
I gotcha. Yeah, that's
No
interesting.
discipline.
Reform. Cool. Michelle, do you want to share a little bit about the People's Archive, the Punk Archive, and Zines' place in that?
Oh, sure. So yeah, collecting zines was part of a larger project to document local music. In our local history department, the People's Archive, before we started this project, there was very little representation of local music in our collections, even though it was hugely of interest to people. And so we felt like in order to remedy that, we would, several staff launched 2 different projects to document DC punk and also go-go several years ago. And we, started by reaching out to the local music community to get support, and also to see, who had collections of things to share with us. And the response was overwhelming. Just people really people had saved a lot of things, really cared about these collections, and from different times in their life that they were involved in the local music. And so over, from the very beginning, from the launch of it in 2014, the Punk Archive had, really great collections, and the zines were a really important part of that, even though we collect other things like flyers and posters and records and live recordings. And, there's a lot of different formats in the collection, but the zines are one of the most heavily used, just because it's such an important primary source, someone writing about their personal experience at a certain time. And so it's like you have this really direct a window into a time and a place. And so the zines are really heavily used. They're our kind of go-to collection when someone wants to start doing some research, or people don't have to be doing research. They could just be interested. So yeah, that's how it got started in 2014. We're still, still collecting, still programming.
And lending things to the Smithsonian.
And right.
Great. Thank
Putting
you.
on amazing events.
Putting on events, exactly. All right. Well, let's talk about the process of zine making. If you all can give us a little insight about what the process is like, take us through from concept to production, I think that'd be really helpful. So how would a zine begin, and how is it published and distributed? Let's start with Molly and Allison, and then go to Allison.
Well, Molly.
Sorry. Yeah. Whoops. It was a different, universe. Let's be real. Like, we were starting our, pre-internet, mass, immediate distribution was, like something unfathomable. So the way that I think we found out about a lot of zines that we would write away for within the back of magazines that had classifieds, or if they were reviewed, magazines like Maximum Rock and Roll, and then our friends who would review basically each other's fanzines, and then it would say, send $1 for postage, or send $1 plus postage, or it was very, very, that was like a economy of it. And I remember sending a check to one of the Donna Dresch for her fanzine, and she sent it back. And she was like, I can't cash this. She didn't have a bank account. I don't know what it was, but and I think we sold ours for something annoying like $1.50. So, we were trying to keep it really, accessible, but how annoying is it to send quarters that you had to tape and hide and things like that? Like, it was really not really think that part through. So, and we were students. We didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have a lot of resources. So to make them, I think we used tape and, cut out things, and, we didn't have design programs, or, we had typewriters and copy machines to blow up text and make copies of photos. And that was, I think that the way we approached that, and then how to duplicate them so that we could either send them to our friends or sell them at a show or sell them in the mail. I borrowed some paper from the United States government. At one point, I had access to a congressman's office that I worked at, and was able to make some copies off after hours. And so that was my, a wild thing, and was able to sort of, I think that was our first edition that we made that way. And not totally proud of that, but sort of.
Oh, come on. It's cool. Well, I just would like to interject here. Didn't you get snowed in the US Capitol building while making our zine?
The story is, I don't want to take up too much time, but the story is, there was holiday break, when Christmas, I guess, and I still had access. I wasn't working for the congressman anymore, but my card got me in to, talk about different universe. And I was able to get into the office, and it was, recess. And then it snowed, and I was stuck, and I had no food, and I had there's vending machines. I had enough money to go get a lot of candy bars and chips. That's what I was there for at least 24 hours. It's a little bit like Eloise, or some child story, but maybe that would be a good children's book.
Yeah.
Trapped with the evidence, snowed in at the Capitol.
Thank you, Shelby. I was paid okay. Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to say a little bit about not just the process of, hands-on making it, but also just the content. Like, how do you decide what's going to go in there? And especially for our first zine, I mean, we were just grabbing anything, that you could make a collage with or something, and make titles with, and whatever is kind of a funny photo or picture or whatever. And I mean, the master copies of our zines have original photographs and things like that still taped to them. Like, I'm still missing some of my best photos because they're taped to the master and I have no idea where that is now. So, I don't know. And I do remember, though, with Grrrl Germs, we would have one interview with a girl band, generally girl fronted band or something, per issue. And that was one feature. And, you're using a tape recorder from Radio Shack or whatever to record it, and then transcribing it and all that stuff. So, yeah, it was a different time, not having any computer, digital, anything to help. I don't know.
Yeah.
But wait, we should talk about Kinko's, right? Just really quickly, another way to get your photocopies of your fanzines made, or when you're laying it out, was to go to Kinko's. And there were so many tricks. Like, you had those, what were those blocks, the counters? And some people would drop them and be like, I don't know what happened. But also, if you had a strong magnet, you could set it back to 0. Or I just sometimes would grab 2 of them and just make most of the copies on one and make a few on the other, and then just take the smaller one to the counter to pay for, or, you knew someone who worked there or something, and that person would eventually get fired. But anyways, I want to hear how you made yours.
Making it happen.
Not too different. I mean, I guess computer technology was around, but I don't like to use it for stuff like this. It's just, I feel like it just makes it clunky. So I cut and pasted everything too. And I did a lot of interviews through touring. So for me, the zine and the bands I was in were related in that way. I feel like when I stopped touring, it was harder for me to make zines because I wasn't meeting as many people, especially when you're trying to interview Black people and like Black weirdos in like subculture. There's not that many in one town. So you kind of have to be like traveling around to find them all and be able to sit down and talk to them. I'm not like a fan of like email interviews. So like, I want to say like 95% of my interviews were like in person. And making zines was just like hanging out by myself and listening to a bunch of records and I don't know, just cutting and pasting away. But, you know, it was usually like a year's worth of content that I collected. And then just like this push at the end, like maybe I was going to Chicago Zine Fest and it was on this date. So I needed to have them ready for that date. And I would just like push through and make the whole thing so I could like show up somewhere with zines.
Nice, yeah. All right, a lot of interesting through lines here, one of which I'm seeing is about Washington, D.C. So we know the Riot Grrrl movement, you know, developed a lot in DC. DC's always had a very robust, kind of famous and diverse punk scene. And obviously we have the DC Public Library represented, the Smithsonian is headquartered in DC. Can you all talk a little bit about the significance of punk and punk scenes in the nation's capital? Anybody?
Well, I mean, I grew up in the suburbs of DC and then I moved there after dropping out of Virginia Tech. So I was like 19 or something, or 20. And at the time, Allison lived there. I think you were in a band called Deep Lust. I'm bummed that I miss Cold Cold Hearts. But yeah, I don't know. I just feel like DC was a really amazing punk scene to have access to first thing because it was so, this is a kind of boring word, but substantial. Like it wasn't like nihilistic and empty and vapid. It was actually like, I don't know, like educational and like responsible and like positive. And yeah, like zines were a huge part of that. And then I think it took me a minute to realize, I was saying in the other conversation we had yesterday, that it took me a minute to realize how big of a role DC played in Riot Grrrl, because I guess I always thought of it as like the Pacific Northwest thing. So like the politics of Riot Grrrl and the politics of like bands like Fugazi were like something I was exposed to, you know, like right away. And yeah, like, I don't know, like everything about that inspires everything I've done since then, you know, like constantly knowing that you can tie art to politics. I mean, that fundamentally has just been so important and like guides me through even with ceramics and just like everything being like educational and like substantial, but also so fun. And like, I don't know, I just feel like it was an awesome place to learn about punk.
Yeah, it's interesting that there's I think it is the association with Riot Grrrl is primarily the Northwest, but we started the fanzine in DC. We made the first one there, and what we did with it was to hand, it was one piece of paper that we handed out, a glorified flyer to try to, network, or if you will, with, girls and women that were at shows and try to, inspire a conversation and some community. And that was the space that was offered to have that first meeting was at Positive Force. And I can't remember what show that we first handed it out. Do you, Allison, do you remember what show it was? Like, who was actually playing?
I remember being at the old 930 Club. What I think. Am I right?
Remember being at a church in Mount Pleasant, so I don't know.
More likely, because I didn't like going.
Well, maybe they're both, right? There were a lot of, we went to like as many shows as we could.
Yeah.
I just can't remember who played. But yeah, it was sort of, like kind of like a, an olive branch, if you will, like, hey, here's a thing that we made. And I think that, the environment of the summers, there were all these shows, positive force shows were happening. And they were exciting, and we were up all night hanging out, and sort of like just that energy of and spirit, I think, is pretty unique, at least at that time. I don't know if it's maintained all these years later, but it was pretty wonderful to have so much inspiration from your peers, and then also to make something. I saw in the chat someone asked a question like, did anybody confront you about something that you wrote in your zine? And I do think that there was some of our peers who were not women or girls who looked at that like, what are you talking about in this? Like, I don't know. What do you think we are talking about? So it's kind of interesting I hadn't remembered that for a while.
They should. It's bad writing on my part, but anyways, well, yeah, I think, one thing that I think was important about being in DC, okay, I'm not from there, but Molly and Osar, but for me as a outsider coming in, or a visitor or something, coming from the Northwest, a lot of the people who did kind of start Riot Grrrl or Riot Grrrl-ish bands or sentiments came from the Northwest, but descended upon DC in like starting summer 91 or something. And I think it was weird to us to all of a sudden actually not see very many women on stage. And I think we were a little bit shocked by that. Now, this is not to say that women weren't completely participating in all sorts of aspects of the scene there, because there was a long history of that. But it seemed like it was a little bit more with people who were writers and photographers and organizers and stuff like that. So of course we just stomped in. It was like, what? Where are the girls? And probably ignoring a lot of women who were already there. But so I think that I want to say that not all the DC influence was necessarily positive, but there was a positive result. Also, I think it's in my mind, it was very male dominated, or just kind of toxic masculinity city. And I do want to stress also how different and separate the city was from national politics. I mean, everyone who worked for the government, at that time, no one lived in the city. They all lived in the suburbs, and they would get the hell out as quick as they could back to their isolated suburb. And so the city was just
a little bit of a generalization, but
it might be, but it was a really poor city because of that, because people,
right. Well, there's an extreme,
taxes,
yes, I understand what your point is. Yeah.
That, and I also think, but also I think that the politics of like a subculture and stuff were really different than what was going on in the mainstream business part of the city or whatever.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Michelle, working specifically with the DC local collections, what are your thoughts about that?
I just had a thought on, Molly asked or wondered if the spirit still persists now, and I'm happy to report that it has. Because they're all right. I feel like it's a place where like the different generations of the punk scene have sort of helped the next group along, and continue to do that. And whether it's, making records or putting on shows, or, supporting people in different ways, that's sort of a thread that's been consistent from what I've only lived here 20 years, but from what I've observed, that's a thread that's been consistent throughout, when punk started here, and it still continues today. And our project is about documenting the whole story from the past and the present. And so it's been great with this project to engage the current local music community in, what we're doing through programming, and also collecting what's happening now. Our best program was just in December when Osa came and launched her book at MLK Library and did an awesome panel discussion. So I'm talking about programming just because as a public library, that's how we engage the community in what we do. Not just taking things and putting them in boxes and sort of waiting around, but actually, you know, putting on shows, you know, being part of, engaged in the community and part of the community. Not just, you know, sort of a separate observer of it. But so yeah, I just started talking and forgot what the question was. Sorry.
Yeah, that's great. Just your reflections on punk in DC in particular, sort of, you know, the significance of having punk scenes in the nation's capital. I think you've done a great job of that. I love all the programs you guys put on. You're so active and engaging with what you're doing, and you know, really bringing innovative types of programming to the library. And I think it's just really important. So thanks for all that you're doing. I guess we can move on then. You know, the program today obviously complements the exhibition, which is Music HerStory, Women in Music of Social Change. So, you know, let's talk a little about social change. In creating zines like Grrrl, Germs and Shotgun Seamstress, did you all hope to contribute to a climate of socio-political change? It sounds like you did, but I'd love to hear more reflections on that. And, you know, more about your intentions. And what do you hope people came away with after reading your work, like then and now? You know, maybe your zines will be archived in the People's Archive. And what do you hope people will, you know, reflect on your work now? And for Michelle, do you think that collecting and stewarding zines has potential, just those acts of contributing to social change? I'd love to hear more your thoughts on that. We can start with, let's start with Osa.
Okay. I mean, of course. Well, I want to start by saying that I made the zine for myself as kind of a way to, I guess, kind of, I don't know, like make myself feel better about about the experience of being isolated. So it was like me creating like an imaginary world where being a Black punk was like a normal, regular thing instead of like, I don't know, because a lot of the zines by people of color who came out like right before mine were about kind of like leaving the punk scene. And if you really cared about your identity as a person of color, like, why would you stay kind of thing. And so I didn't feel that way, and I needed a way to like express and like normalize my experience to myself. And I think that's why I like got in touch with so many people to try to make this project happen, because I needed those connections. And then I think that just has an effect of like passing that on to other people, that you can feel confident and secure in your identity, and you don't have to feel like you're I don't know, like betraying your identity as a person of color by being in the scene, or you don't have to feel like white people define it. It can be yours. And then the idea of just wanting Black people to experience like complete and total liberation through art and self-expression, like we can do whatever we want, we can be whatever we want. I mean, and I think that was coming at a time when that was becoming like an ever-increasing common message. Like Afropunk had happened, and like Black people are doing like much weirder stuff now than they were like even 15 or 20 years ago. And like when I grew up, it was like if you listen to certain kind of music, you were trying to act white, and there were like labels around like what it was to act white and to act Black. And I just wanted to like bust that open and just be like, we can do whatever we want. We can be whoever we want, and we are going to be respected because we respect ourselves. So it wasn't even about like respectability politics. Reject that. We still deserve like full rights and liberty, expressing ourselves like exactly the way that we want to. So I would hope that like caused some tiny ripple of social change. I don't know.
Yeah, fantastic. Molly and Allison.
I mean, I think that motivation really does strike so, you know, familiar. you know, trying to have a place for expression that you know, I don't think we saw in the same way. And you know, my personal sort of, you know, how I got to having some, you know, I think growing up in Washington did give me a lot of, you know, like fundamental awareness of politics and activism. And I think the time that we were starting our journey, like our creative journey, if you will, was, you know, there were a lot of specific sort of places that, you know, were inspiring. So, you know, whether it was Rock Against Reagan from my, you know, a little bit younger, and then, you know, sort of the anti-apartheid movement, and where punk and music would sort of influence that. And then, you know, the fight for reproductive rights, and then the first Gulf War, like a lot of these things were all sort of layered in and interconnected in ways. And so using and finding, you know, whether it was music or writing about music or whatever, those things did have a point of connection that sort of did, you know, I think inspire why we wanted to claim the space for women and girls in music, with the work that we were doing. And that, you know, that was, I think it still is a little bit personally, when I reflect on it, like a little shocking that it was so shocking that, you know, we wanted to do that, and that people would find it sort of so alarming. Or, I mean, there were moments where people like really did, it was almost like a freak show that we wanted to see more women on stage. You know, that was like a concept that required some people to, you know, it was really so challenging. But, you know, that it really was frightening for some people. And it was a simple, I think, and Allison, you know, love to hear how you think about it, but like, you know, just for us to have to sort of use a phrase like we're pro girl, not anti boy, or some silly thing like that, you know, like just really, upon reflection, pretty tedious.
Speak for yourself. No, I'm kidding.
Okay.
I mean, I'm pro girl and maybe sometimes anti boy. No, I'm just kidding. No, yeah, perfect. I mean, I think for me, I was kind of thinking about what the kind of intentionality or why to make a zine really, I mean, so much of it was about kind of taking over the means of representation to express ourselves. And obviously DIY was the most accessible and easiest way, a zine. But I do think that times were, of course, different back then. And they're really, mainstream media was not really covering subcultures very much at all. Or if they were just didn't get it, and we're covering it in a weird way that didn't get it. So I think also we were kind of filling a hole, a gap that existed at the time in a lot of different ways. Also, I think coming out of like post-hardcore, whatever, and grunge is what there was a bit of a pushback of like, hey, we need to create the culture we want to see, and or write it down in zines or whatever. And something that didn't seem so masculine, or I don't know what, but like bro-y and violent and stuff like that. And I think there's something about the kind of craftiness of zines, like you're sitting around cutting and pasting and all that, that I think a lot of times that kind of stuff is, I don't know, relegated, I guess, as women's work or whatever, and dismissed a bit, like even just like teen bedroom culture and teen girl bedroom culture and stuff like that. It's like, because that's something you might sit around and make a collage in your room or whatever. And it was often dismissed. So I think a big point of it too was to uplift this kind of elevate craft and elevate, I don't know, teen girl bedroom culture and things like that. I mean, I'm not saying there's just one culture, but just things that were often dismissed by mainstream society, and try to elevate those things. Is what we were doing, I felt too.
Absolutely. Representation. Michelle, what do you think about the sociopolitical significance of collecting and stewarding zines in the public library?
I think one of my favorite things about having these zine collections is that we get class visits from high school, junior high, college classes who come to our department, you know, either to do specific research or to just learn how to do research, and to bring out boxes of zines and to just sort of be in the room while kids are, you know, sort of probably seeing these for the first time, most of them, and hearing them read something out loud that they found funny, or I hope that it gives them the idea that they can create their own culture, that they don't have to just consume it, they can make it. And that, because besides the zines, we have, you know, we have paste ups of original zines and flyers. We have other sort of related documents that are, you know, how someone put a show together or a benefit or something like that. And I think by just sort of handling these materials, it's like, I hope it instills this idea that, you know, whatever you imagine you would like to do, you can just do it yourself. You don't have to wait for it to happen or to join it, but you can find other people, make something together, be creative, you know, or, you know, take on political action, you know, just with your friends. And so I don't know, it's really gratifying to me to be there with students who are coming across this as a medium for the first time, and see how much they enjoy, you know, reading and just sort of putting themselves in someone else's experience too. That kind of is a really important thing for anyone to do. So that's been a really wonderful part, besides just as a you know, research primary source document. I feel like it does have that sort of potential for a transformative thing too.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you're highlighting the educational aspects of, you know, collecting zines. And you're right, you know, making something yourself is very empowering, especially in today's age where like a lot of students are, you know, creating digital things, but creating something tangible you can hold and, you know, will be archived for posterity. I think that can be really powerful. So I'm really glad you brought that
It did
up.
occur to me along those lines that, you know, I in my current work, I spend a lot of time looking at numbers of, you know, the actual data of representation. And for example, with women producers, there's like 2% of what you see on the top 100 on Billboard is, you know, has women producers. And, you know, the thing, it's trying to like, you know, peel back what that origin is and why that barrier exists to progress. And there's lots of reasons, but part of it is that sort of technology from the beginning when you kind of start to tinker and patch and, you know, like the learning those methods and techniques is, you know, takes resources, but it also takes time and interest. And I think what zines are, you know, sort of fundamentally accessible and in that sort of way that you were describing, Allison, sort of like crafty or collaborative, and, you know, ways to make them, and you can feel that sense of satisfaction really quickly. I think that's kind of an interesting aspect to it, you know, that anyone can do it literally.
Yeah, and you get an immediate result. I love that too. Yeah. Well, I think we're ready to go to some audience Q&A. The chat has been so active. Thank you to everyone who's been contributing there and giving your ideas and letting us know your, you know, your thoughts and your own personal experiences with zines. It's a really rich chat right now. Thank you so much. A few things in the Q&A we'll highlight. Let's see, we have one from Herman who says, hi, as a 1977 punk, I ask, several 1970s first wave women say that during the first wave, there was progress for women, but that the later 1980 rise of the hardcore tendency was in the 1980s sense within punk undid some of that progress for women that was done in the 70s. Susie Sue and Penelope Houston of US first wave punk band and the Avengers say so. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's right? What do you think? That's the first question. Does anyone want to take a crack at that?
I mean, I could just say quickly that Alice Bagg from the LA punk scene has told me precisely that, just in interviews with her. I mean, I don't want to speak for her too much, but like, yeah, she said that things were really different in the beginning, and that there was all sorts of like women, queers, LGBTQ, yeah, and women of color and everyone making this scene, and it was very collaborative and everything. And that, yeah, 80s hardcore kind of came and turned it into more of a, I don't know, I guess a suburban cis straight white guy bro dude thing. I don't know. And she felt like, I think a lot of old school punks felt like their thing was ruined by that.
Interesting. Yeah,
Guys, you should listen to Toby Vale's interview on podcast interview on Turned Out a Punk, because she was around for the early 80s and talks about this exactly. But yeah, I mean, I was too young. I don't know from firsthand experience. So
interesting perspective. We have another question from, let's see, from Miranda. She says, I'm sure you'll mention it, if so, but anyone have plans to tour again? I was so stoked to see La Tigre is touring this summer. What are you guys up to?
Cold Hearts reunion.
I would do a reunion with any of my bands if all the members wanted to, or even if some of the members wanted to. Well, I mean, Molly and I are going to be playing a show, Mosswood Meltdown Festival in Oakland, July 2nd, as Bratmobile.
Not touring, but we're going to play a show.
Yeah.
That lineup is insane.
Yeah, it looks incredible. Gravy Train, Mika Mika, all these bands, so cool.
Mm.
And JJ Fad,
I know. And ESG.
it's amazing. Yeah,
Oh my
it's
God.
amazing. I can't wait to be there.
Great. Question for Michelle from Irene. Zines, and often the punk scene, are inherently DIY and often anti-authoritarian. Have you ever received pushback from members of the communities you are archiving that these items are being stored in a government institution?
I like that question. I think it's funny.
So, I mean, we are government funded, but I think of the library as a community institution. We have, 26 branches out in the neighborhoods. Our mission is to be engaged with the community. So I feel like that's how, at least in DC, people don't think of us as the government, but as part of the community. And I think because we're a public library and we are very open and accessible, as more so than other libraries generally, but I think it makes people feel like they can come and use this collection. We're very encouraging of it. And so we try to reduce barriers to access to these collections and really emphasize that we are, kind of documenting the people of DC, and their experiences. And so no, I think people understand that here, that's what the library is about, not, and we just happen to have government funding, which means we can, guarantee that this will persist over time. So it's the best of both worlds.
Great, thank you. I will take the last question from Gary, and then we will start wrapping up. So Gary says, do any of the panelists think that it's almost too easy nowadays in this digital world to tell people about your art, music, politics, but no one is actually reading or listening anymore? Have we romanticized DIY culture a tad too much? I don't think so, but what do you think? From Gary. Anyone want to take a crack at that? Or maybe comments about, digital versus physical publications, and yeah.
I honestly
Well,
think these are a good way
Yeah,
to
go ahead.
talk about things that need to be discussed in longer form. I think that online platforms often don't give people the time or space or attention span. I don't know. I think zines are actually a great place to be fully heard, where people actually kind of sit down with what you have to say and can't respond right away. So I don't know. I think that is the value of them. And I think that that kind of keeps them relevant in a world where digital media seems to be dominant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
All right, great. So I think we'll turn it back over to Wesley to wrap us up here. I just want to thank everyone again. This was such a great discussion. Thank you all for spending time with us and letting us know your thoughts and sharing your work with us. So I'll turn it back over to Wesley for some concluding comments, and we thank everyone for joining. Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith. On behalf of Smithsonian Libraries and Archives, I want to thank Meredith, Molly, Allison, Osa, and Michelle for generously sharing your knowledge and your experiences this evening. We also thank you, our attendees, for your interest in the program and lively engagement in chat and the Q&A. If you've not experienced it yet, we encourage you to visit the exhibition online or in the museum before July 2024. And if you're in the area, we hope you consider attending the zine workshops this weekend, and there's been a lot of good information dropped in chat. On a final note, we invite you to join us for upcoming Smithsonian Libraries and Archives programs. Follow us on social media or visit our website for more information. And with that, I will say thank you and good night to everyone.